Hello,
We're back again.
he's Shabazz.
He's Pete Marshall, and this is Cripchat UK. And today we have yet another guest.
Fourth episode in a row. Anyway.
We are not the Jonathan Ross Show, by the way. Let me just say that for the record. And anyway, we'll let our fourth guest introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Well, technically, I'm third in the room, so like fourth guest sounds a little weird. But okay, I'm Samantha. I am from Cape Town, South Africa. I am a social scientist by training, project manager by experience, and I'm an emerging creative. So I write poetry, play around with kind of visual arts, and also playwriting, and communications and marketing, lots of things.
So could I start by asking you, because I'm a creative myself, so as a fellow creative, could I ask you how long you've been doing this creative work?
So interesting. I mean, as a teenager, I used to write a lot of poetry. And then I kind of stopped because I thought it was just like this emo teen nonsense. Yeah. And I went to uni and I kind of just, then it was like chasing the dream of a career, and I kind of just stopped. And then lockdown happened, and like there was just so much happening, and I realized that writing started like releasing some of that stuff. And yeah, it was also interesting because one of my sisters is a creative in the UK, and she needed to attend a course, but she double booked herself. So she asked the course convener if I could sit in. And the rest is kind of history. So I've kind of been, sadly, maybe I've been more plugged in with the UK arts, like creative sector than I am back home. I've been kind of trying to figure out how to get in, and I think the same kind of conversations around, I'm no longer a youth. So here youth stops at 35 and I'm 36. So I'm just outside the cusp of a lot of kind of government initiated stuff. So a lot of what I do is basically for free, and I either post it on my website or YouTube. And I mean, I would like it to be a career, but still haven't figured out how to do that yet.
How did you get into playwriting?
That was really funny, or maybe not so funny. So there was a call out for a platform called Virtual Collaborators, and my sister and I, we've always wanted to write something about my medical condition. And so we were just like, let's go for it. We kind of had a template from the course I kind of got sent into, and we ended up sitting in the course together towards the end. And so we had this thing, and the course conveners are really nice, and they're like, you have something there, you should kind of explore it. And so Genetic Beauty was born because I suffer from a very rare genetic condition called Marfan syndrome. And it was just kind of a way to talk about the condition, but also bring into fact kind of questions around invisible disabilities, because I don't look disabled, but because of my condition, I do have several disabilities. So there was kind of, there was that. And of course, being Black, we also kind of played around with that. But yeah, I'm very proud of that piece. It's on YouTube. So that was like my first piece written ever. And then that kind of sparked me writing a lot more poetry. And then now it's kind of, I'm writing it's almost done, my first monologue on my own, which has been quite a scary experience.
When did you start writing that?
Maybe 2 weeks ago.
Do you have a name for it yet?
I do. It's called Resilience, but it's the phonetic spelling of resilience.
Okay.
Not very good with titles. I don't know as a creative if you find that tricky as well, but
No, I'm the opposite way round. I think of a title first and then the project second.
okay. I usually use the other way around, and then I go, oh, titles, character names. I know what I want to say, but yeah,
Because for me, until it's a being, it's not a real thing. And
that's true. Interesting.
for
Interesting.
for it to become real, it has to have a name, so I can give it a character, and
Yeah.
it has a soul for me then. But it's just interesting to see how different creative people work in different ways. And I always like writing together with people because, as you probably know, I
Ah.
like talking. So I like bouncing ideas off people. And
Okay.
writing alone, but in a room you go mad, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Having all the
Uh.
different characters in your head is
Yeah.
not very healthy.
No, it isn't. I mean, I haven't officially launched it, but I was like, oh, not another Facebook group. But I actually want to start a Facebook group for people who are telling stories which aren't mainstream, which I feel like is what I do, and have a space for people to, because I've been on a lot of Zooms, and one, you either see the same people kind of putting their work out there, but also kind of having a session where it's just one person and it's like they're like literally all the attention gets put on them and people give them constructive feedback so that when they walk away, they go, okay, I know what's not working. Where in a lot of kind of these Zoom spaces I've been in, it's usually like 3 or 4 and it's timed. And for me, like writing resilience, thankfully my sister, who's my creative partner, I have the beauty of sitting with her for an hour and like cross questioning and going, but why didn't you understand this and why didn't you understand that? So that's something I'm hoping to do and that people will be interested in as well.
And what kind of impact does that have on your relationship with your sister? Because I can't imagine having a sibling as a co-writer. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, she's been a writer since, you know, like she was born a writer. She's one of those, I feel like she has a excuse me, like a natural knack for it. But we do have these conversations where I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know how to write, like you write better, and she kind of just shuts that shit down very quickly. But there is a negotiation process because I've been almost like in like an academic space for 10 years, I do approach writing very differently to her. So it's kind of, there is a kind of negotiation of, okay, your brain thinks like this and your brain thinks like that. And sometimes with Genetic Beauty, we had the script and then we did separate edits and then we came together and discussed why I thought this was good and why she thought. And sometimes you'd be like, yeah, okay, no, I can see that your thing sounds better. And sometimes it's like we both make the same. So it's a negotiation all the time. I mean, thankfully we have a good relationship. So, you know, we can actually.
Because academic writing, sorry, last one from me for now. Academic writing can be kind of mechanical, and
Yes.
you know, it can the words don't really pop off the page in the same way in some fictional writing. So that for me is a massive difference, you know.
Yeah, which is why I have very few kind of like published in peer-reviewed papers writing. I always wrote what they called grey literature, so opinion pieces, you know, news articles, because I feel that also allows more freedom for reflection on what it is you're saying. And it's probably why I never did my PhD, because I kind of just was like, I don't think I can write like that for the rest of my life. I find it quite constrained in many ways.
Anyway, I'll let Pete say something now before he shoots me.
Plug. I've said something. Anyway, no, in terms of a question, I'd be interested to hear about, you mentioned earlier on that you did a recording for for a university art department thing on Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that? What happened? What was?
Cool. So it's actually it's with Ezekiel's Museum South Africa, and they're having an exhibition called Tata Madiba, and Tata kind of means father, which is, you know, in Xhosa. I'm probably not doing the X click properly. So they've kind of, because of COVID and everything, they've tried to find a way to still have the exhibition going on. What's interesting about the museum is it's mainly like marine biology. But in the middle of the actual museum, in the physical museum, there's a space where because there's a lot of like schools, they take the kids there for tours, and they get to, there's a space where they actually have conversations about Nelson Mandela. So they decided to do this virtually, the exhibition virtually. One, like I saw the demo they basically recreated the museum like in a virtual world, and I was completely blown away. So when it goes live, I'm going to flood it all over my social media platforms because I think it's super cool. And then they chose themes that kind of were pertinent to what Nelson Mandela kind of stood for, the legacy he left. And the theme I was kind of asked to speak on with a kind of another activist, a more kind of on the ground activist, was leadership. It was really, I enjoyed it very much because it's, you know, they ask questions around what's a good leader, you know, and also thinking about the youth in the country and what lessons they kind of should be learning around leadership. And, you know, because there is for me anyway, I feel like I'm reaching the point where the baton needs to be passed on to the younger ones so they can kind of, whatever my generation hasn't solved yet, like, you know, they need to be able to do it. But I don't necessarily, you know, one of the things I had said was South Africa has the most respected constitution in the world. It's airtight. Implementation, another story. But, you know, for me, I would like to see young people kind of using the system to actually, using these policies to actually make change. But yeah, we've talked about the legacy and why young people are angry. And it was just a really lovely discussion. I don't want to give too much away so that you can go and see it and click on my section of the podcast and listen to what I had to say. So
send us a link and we will retweet it tomorrow when the podcast actually goes out.
I'm not sure when it's going live, but when it does, I will tag you guys in it. So not to worry.
1 second, Shabazz. How does what you said about the constitution implementation versus how does that affect the disabled community more broadly and disabled activism?
For me, you know, the constitution's quite clear about recognizing people with disabilities, and, you know, kind of making sure that there are structures in place so that they're incorporated into the social sphere, into workplaces. I think ideally they also said the education system, but we haven't quite figured that one out. And I think that's where the problem lies, to be honest, is you kind of, unless you're able to pass off and go into mainstream schooling, you're pretty much destined to be weaving baskets for the rest of your life. And so I do think it's the forgotten group. They're very much the forgotten group. I also think, again, this is my opinion, that even the notion of a community doesn't exist in South Africa. There are few people kind of trying to do stuff And what's interesting is a lot of them sit in universities. So that also brings up a broader question of they're still using a very strong medical model on disability. And the social, not to get all theoretical, but it's that, it's a medical condition, we can fix medical things versus, yes, there's a place for that, but there's a huge just ignored space about actually that people with disabilities are integrated into society. And I mean, even for me, I once went to a conference with the one group, I honestly can't remember their name, but they're based in a university here in Cape Town. And I actually, for the first time, and I have a disability, but like for the first time, I'd seen somebody without arms. And I was just like, I have a disability, I shouldn't be staring. But I caught myself staring. And that just for me triggered something about, yes, when you don't see these people, terrible, these people, but when you don't see people who are different and look different, then, there is that stare factor. I mean, people in wheelchairs still get stared at. And I feel like that's even, because of television and things like that, that's probably something you shouldn't be staring at. But blind people with canes get stared at. They prefer the ones with the dogs and interfere with the dogs, which is also another story. A former colleague was just like, and they were just like, why are you so aggressive? But, so I always say to people, when you see a blind person with a dog, do not greet the dog. The dog is working, actually. Like, don't interrupt. He's actually working. And a lot of people, because it's animals, it's like, oh, animal cute. And he would always scream at them, like, leave my dog alone. We're working here. But yeah, so gone off on a tangent. But I think, it's written in policy. It's there in terms of, integration, in terms of making sure that people with a variety of needs are kind of attended to, but it doesn't happen, basically, from my experience.
And why doesn't it happen, do you think?
I think when you've come out of like institutionalized, legalized racial regime, I think it's just like in terms of priorities of order, people just go, why do we need to actually care about that? But I think that's a complete cop-out. I do think there isn't, I think if your family is not accepting you and doing everything they can, if you're a child born with a disability, and if your family finds you as a burden, how can you expect society to, So I think there's also, again, it's very much a stereotype, but unless you have money, unless you have money in this country, it's basically, it's not a good future for you, because it's your family who supports you. And I think for a lot of kind of poor families, which in South Africa, it's a very huge population, it then almost feels like, and you've seen interviews and people feel bad that they use the word burden, but you can also understand where they come from, limited resources. They are needs, there's people who is just like, I can't afford a wheelchair, so we have to carry him everywhere. And so they're just these realities of households. But at the same time, I think as a society, I think we're so focused on ticking the race box that I think even when it comes to gender and, representation of females in the workplace, that also takes second place. But it's also very clear in terms of like the employment equity law, that actually that's a group of people who have traditionally been underrepresented, and we need to start seeing change on that. So I just feel like people with disabilities are really at the bottom of the barrel. And also from what I've just kind of observed, if you have a nice disability, then, you know, companies kind of create these things of like, okay, can you answer the phone? That's as far as you get, is being a receptionist.
Yeah.
Right. And then they can say, we have someone with a disability on our profile, you know, in our employee. So I think, I do think it's a group of people who are just invisible, actually, to society. Sad as that sounds.
Yeah, and I just a question just came into my mind that I was reading your blog earlier, the one that you did about 10 years ago, I think, about
8.
talking about the cutting edge program,
Yeah.
right? And the question I had was maybe a difficult one, but I just wanted to ask it. You know, what you wrote then to what you know now, has society changed in that time? Or do those things still hold true today?
I would sadly say that not much has changed. Maybe the statistical numbers I referenced have changed. And mainly because I think there's a broader incorporation of people with learning disabilities, which has also been a little bit of it has caused tension in the education system in terms of, you know, because there's pressure to be, I was just thinking of my time at uni. Of course, there's kind of pressure to go, are you accommodating people with disabilities? And like in a whole university, because there was a disability unit, there were 6 of us who had physical disabilities. And then the university decided, okay, we're now going to include people with learning disabilities. And suddenly the number just like went 10 times bigger. And so it looks like they're actually accommodating, you know, a lot more people with disabilities. And then in that process, and it was just chatting amongst the small cohort. In that process, the people with physical disabilities kind of went, wait, we don't exist now, because now they were just catering for this large number of people with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
Which is why when I say disabled community, I don't think there's any coherence whatsoever. I think it is still very much like, okay, all the blind people, you hang out, you know, all the people who have some kind of physical disability that has rendered you in a wheelchair, you guys are a group. Learning disabilities, you're a group. And there really isn't conversation, you know, amongst these groups.
Resentful of each other then? Like say that if there was a group like yourselves, a group of disabled people, and then you said the numbers of disabled people swelled because they brought learning disabled people in. Do you start looking at the learning disabled people going, yeah, you're taking the resources that we need as well, you know?
I observed that. I actually did observe that.
Yeah.
And that was what's sad, right? Because you're not supposed to, if anything, there should be
solidarity.
There should be that's the word, you know, because you're just like, no, actually giving us access to things doesn't mean it should come at an expense for another group of people. But yeah, those conversations were being had of like, oh, okay, now they're focusing on these guys.
Could I just quickly on learning disability? Sorry, this is a very like tricky word.
Yes.
So in terms of, are you talking about dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia? Are you talking about that group? Because there's learning difficulties and learning differences, and this is an entire,
Yeah, we're not as nuanced as the UK in terms of clarifying it, but yes, it's kind of it is that. And so even I think learning difficulties are just thrown in with learning disabilities, you know. So if you kind of if you needed, for example, extra time, for a lot of them, that was the thing. It was like needed extra time during exams, or they couldn't sit in major rooms and needed a special space to be able to write the exams. So again, that group wasn't even clearly defined. It was more just, it's like, if you need this specific thing, then, and you can prove with like a doctor's letter, then you get it.
So okay. So when you're talking about learning difficulties, what you mean is that presumably just a medical doctor, or do you mean a psychologist or a psychiatrist? Because again, it's kind of interesting going through the kind of the bureaucracy of actually, because how that entire thing is funded, like it matters. It's an interesting topic. So sorry. If you don't know, then
I'll be honest, I don't know. And because also we have where like the US, it's privatized healthcare. The public healthcare system is well, that's a whole other podcast. But I think if you can just medically prove, I don't think it matters whether it's a medical doctor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, as long as it's a medical professional who's signed up with a medical board that says you need these requirements, which is why I say it's very much still based in a medical model. And here, like psychologists and psychiatrists are dirty words still. Like you don't just tell anybody you're seeing them.
Okay, first point. So what you're generally talking about there is you don't have a diagnosis. You just have basically an education plan that says you need extra time or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily imply whether you have autism, whether you have dyslexia, dyspraxia, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I mean, like again, I haven't been on the other side of like receiving and reviewing these things, and of course they're confidential. But
yeah.
I think if you can prove, and it doesn't matter from which medical professional, that this is impairing your ability to learn and perform, on par with everybody else, the institution will grant you whatever recommendation is made for you to be, performing at your best. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of the South African social safety net, is there one?
In terms of like
system?
on paper, yes. I mean, so South Africa is known to have the best welfare system in Africa, which is sad because it's a terrible system. But so people with disabilities they updated it. It's something like 1,600 a month in pounds. Drop a zero and halve it. That's what, £80 a month?
£80 a month.
Yeah, like that's kind of that's yeah, but
Not
it's
much.
still understatement of the century. But that we're the only country in Africa actually that has a welfare system, and it's not that great in terms of support. So like safety net, again, it's very much if you come from a upper middle class, upper class family, then your needs will be very much well taken care of, and you can access the private health system. If not, which a majority of South Africans just don't have medical health insurance, you are then kind of left to the public health system, which again leaves a lot to be desired. And especially when it comes to people with disabilities, because again, they kind of anecdotal evidence here, but like they're treated like they're stupid when they go pick up their medication. It's like, oh, what are you talking about? Just take this. And there are those who are kind of like, no, I know I'm supposed to take this. I've read the box, you haven't given me this. But it is that kind of like, whatever attitude. So really, I think which is why I said if you're born in Africa and you're born with a disability, and if it's even more severe, and you're not born in a family with money and private health care, you really, I don't even know if that's living really, because it's, I think you're basically destined to doom, to be honest.
Yeah. And if you were talking to the wider community in South Africa in terms of disability, what like 3 things do you think urgently need to be fixed to make a start on things?
One, I think it's the education. So they have special schools, but these special schools are nowhere on par with kind of normal schools. I use that in inverted commas. So in terms of what children with disabilities are taught, again, it's from a point of you'll never make it, so let us just teach you a trade and maybe you can make some money somehow in your life. So kind of just basic skills, like basic literacy skills, basic mathematics skills is not something they focus on. And for me, that's very problematic. And, myself, there are a couple of friends as well. The only reason we've made it, again, in inverted commas, is because we were snuck into the mainstream school system and basically, struggled our way through. And that's how we got to be able to go to university and all of that. Because if you go to a special school, you're not going to go to university. There was like groundbreaking when there was one girl at our university. It literally made university news because she was the first person ever from a special school to meet the requirements to enter university.
Wow.
But again, she kind of, she was a white South African, so she probably had some external support in terms of additional education support and learning support. But she was the first ever, and I think the last, because I didn't hear about everybody after that. But, so for me, that would be the first thing, is how can we get people with disabilities to be active citizens in society, and also to be able to, and not feel like they're a burden to society, and not feel like, I sometimes wonder, I know there are all these charities, trying to do good things, but I was just like, when this person grew up, did they think they're going to be weaving baskets and creating artistic things for, to be sold to support the charity? Maybe they didn't want to do that. Maybe they wanted to do something else.
Yeah.
And yes, over time, you do realize what your limitations are. Like, I wanted to be a doctor, which is like the most ridiculous thing ever. Like, I was just like, you can't see, mate, like that, like really. But you also learn that as you grow up. But the fact that I had the option to go, I can apply for medical school. I'm really glad they turned me down till today, because I would have just struggled, right? But I feel it's like, that shouldn't be placed on them. That should be something, as an individual, you come to realize, okay, because of my disability and the fact that I can't do A, B, C, D, maybe this is not the profession for me. But you know what, maybe I can try this. But not just like, literally the expectations are so low. And I really have a problem with that you send, that's again, and I would say not even every child with a disability is sent to school, because the parents kind of go and the family goes, oh, that's another thing we need to think about. So again, like those that are going to these special needs schools, there's just the low expectation of, you're not going to make anything, but we'll try and teach you something so that you can make something for yourself. And then there's those that come from families, because of just the realism of economics, go, like, I'm not going to make an effort to still try and get my child into a school, So I will just take care of them at home, you know, and get whatever we can get from the social welfare system. And that's just that. So for me, that's definitely the first one. The second one, and I think it's basically, I refer to them as minority identities, like the window dressing of minority identities in the workplace. I think just really needs to stop. I think if you're gonna
What do you mean
hire,
by that?
I mean, so basically, this is my academic brain coming on, so I apologize.
Okay.
But basically, anything that's not, you know, mainstream. So like being heterosexual is, you know, majority identity. But if you're from the LGBTQI plus, that's a minority identity.
Yeah.
Being a woman is a minority identity.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the workplace, because that's also the other way, that's a key kind of sector where that's where you make your living. I think this whole thing of like, okay, we're hiring people because you tick all the boxes, but also not investing in their development, their growth, and especially people with disabilities, right? So fine, okay, maybe it's that you start off being a secretary, but then you go, what else can we do to expand their knowledge or give them more responsibilities and provide them with the support that they need, right? So that they also don't feel like this is all I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because I think nobody wants to feel that way.
Yeah.
Unless you're really passionate about being a secretary or a receptionist, which some people are, and I don't want to take that away from that. But you know, it's kind of just like you're there, you know, and again, those people who get those positions, it's like, are you presentable? Right. So, but I've also seen, again, my former colleague was very high up in terms of like university structures, and he's blind, but he got support, you know, so he had his software on his computer. His PA was great. I mean, for where he was in the university structure, he wasn't supposed to have a PA, but because he was blind, he got one. But you know, stuff like that where you go, yes, actually that's really how it should be done. Is okay, you have a blind person in a very senior management position. Someone needs to be there to assist him beyond, you know, whatever's on the organogram. So for me, that's kind of the second thing, is actually employers need to start taking it seriously, because it's in the policies that, you know, we should be hiring people with disabilities and training them and giving them skills just like everybody else. And like, I actually just think, I think it just needs to start being at the foreground that this is actually a problem. Really, that's the third thing, that actually people with disabilities are ignored unless you are, and met her a few times. I don't think she'll ever remember me, but she is the artistic director for one of the big theaters in Cape Town, and she had polio when she was a kid, and you know, of course, back in the day they didn't know what the hell they were doing, so she has a disability, and I would say she got to where she was because she speaks, and she speaks up, and she speaks loudly. So I mean, I've seen her on TV where she was invited to like supposed to be like a proper, you know, government briefing, and she did not hold back. Like, she literally laid into them on live TV. And I was just like, yeah, unless you're like that, you know, in terms of having just like, I'm going to take you on and I'm not going to hold back, you know. But not everybody has that personality of, you know, like, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to, you know. But what's great about having someone like her in that position is, and I think I sent the link to you on Twitter, is that theaters, you know, is taken on a very different, we're starting to see like a variety of things, because you actually have an autistic director with a disability. So actually there is a program where they actually showcase people with disability and the arts, which I think is great. I think before her, that would never have happened, right? But I do just think as a society, we really just need to start. It needs to be there. It needs to be, like I follow you guys on Twitter, and I kind of see the kind of just like the highlighting of what the issues are and what needs to be looked at. And I kind of go, that's actually what we need. We need a lot more champions kind of going, fine, we have a lot more problems, but you can't keep ignoring this one. Yeah. It's 26 years after democracy and you're still ignoring this one. No.
Yeah. One interesting topic, I think, that kind of has gone all the way through what you said is kind of invisible and visible disabilities.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's an entire combination of things where, on the one hand, for example, you got into a normal school because to a significant degree you have an invisible disability.
Yeah.
But there's other elements of it that honestly, if you never end up getting help because everyone just thinks that you're, or by you I mean third party.
Yes.
So if a person was had another disability and they never end up getting help, then that would be more of a disadvantage. And so would you like to kind of unpack that in the kind of South African context?
I can unpack it from a personal experience, because I'm legally blind, and so I wore glasses like I'm wearing now, but they called them granny goggles back in the day. And so it was more just like, oh, there's just something wrong with her eyes. And it was just like, make sure she sits in the front of the class. And I was just like, I still can't see anything. So, and it's one of the things that now that I'm older and after producing Genetic Beauty, and because we want to kind of expand on that, my sister and I have been sponsored as playwrights by the Space Arts Center to kind of help develop us as emerging playwrights. And so like our first meeting with the literary manager, Mike, we were talking, and he asked a question and said, was hiding worth it? And actually I looked at him and I said, no, actually it wasn't. Because had I spoken up sooner, and really it was, in hindsight, I literally have been like, the school would have been forced to do something, right? Because there's absolutely nothing wrong with my brain. As my mom always reminds me, she's like, there's nothing wrong with your brain. And you're like, yeah, but if the eyes can't see what's happening over there, a little bit difficult. But that's how my hearing became a lot more sharpened, because I never saw anything on any board. I took notes from my ears. I literally went through primary school, high school, uni, like using my ears. And when I was in the safety of my home, I would be able to just read without being judged, because literally the book would need to be by my nose for me to see anything. And so I think I just reached this point after, I think it was after my undergraduate degree, where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I had been accepted to do, it's a little bit different, I think, than in the UK. So we do 3 years and then you finish. And then if you want to do honors, you apply. And that's kind of the beginning of your postgraduate studies. So I was going to do honors, and I literally was like, I can't carry on like this. Like, I literally, and I still do, I have maps of every place I've been to in my head. I would get around university because I counted stairs in every corner I needed to be in. And then it just reached this point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I went to the disability unit, and they were kind of like, why didn't you come to us before? And suddenly, like, I got special software, and it was just like a game changer. I was like, oh, I can invert the color on my screen, and I can zoom it, and I can actually see what's going on. I mean, I think it was an adjustment for my supervisor, but he, you know, he's American, so I think there's also a bit more like in terms of social awareness. Like he, you know, so when he would show stuff on, you know, project his computer on the thing, and after class I'd say, "Can I have a one-on-one session?" He looked at me, and then when he went there, he's like, "I'm so sorry, Sam, I forgot." And then it was just fine, you know. But not everyone had his attitude. But again, he comes from a society where I think it is a bit more talked about, and you know.
Can I just ask, were you using Claro Read and the Claro
No,
software?
I was using Zoom Text. That was the one we got. And then I got as well a handheld. So it was just like if you want to go to a restaurant, it's like was a handheld magnifier. So I could actually switch it on, and I could actually read the menu. And again, in South Africa, that just usually gets stares because people like don't know what. But whenever I was in the UK and I used it, nobody said anything because it's like, okay, you clearly needed help reading the menu. So it is. You're absolutely right. I think you end up just being so anxious about anything and everything really. And what was funny is I started off in a science degree, and how I knew that it was time to accept that I was legally blind. I broke a pipette in a lab experiment. And the lab manager said to me, "Do you know how hard that glass is?" And I broke it. And I still have a scar on my hand because it literally, like I was rushed to hospital, stitches, everything. And that's when I was like, you can't pretend anymore. Like you actually, this is not a sustainable this is not a profession for you, because if you can't see down a microscope and you can't run experiments for yourself, because I think for first year you had a partner and my partner was just like, "Oh, don't worry, you just write down the stuff, I'll look." But then by second year you have to do things by yourself, and I was like, "Ooh, shit." And the one day I was just so frustrated and I broke a pipette, and those things are made up of like really hard glass. And I think those were the beginnings of like, what are you doing? But it still took another 3 years before I was like, just say you need help. But it's really hard because it just changes the way everyone then looks at you very differently. I decided to get a guide cane as well. But again, I was like already in my 20s. I was so used to kind of I had my way of coping. So I got one, but I rarely used it because it's just like, I could see people staring at me, and you could see people surprised that they could see how I could make eye contact there, because there was just like, wait, you're not blind? Then why are you using this, But yeah, you're right. If I went back, I would never have done it. I would have done things a lot differently, because, there are spaces, they're not, and it's because those spaces kind of believe that people with disabilities need to be supported. I think that needs to be more widestream, but there are spaces who'll go, okay, we'll support you in the best way we can. And that's kind of what they did. But then, interestingly enough, I mean, I still identify as legally blind, but in 2015, I fell in Heathrow Airport, of all places, on my way back to Cape Town after a visit, and my retina detached and in the one eye, and so I had to go for surgery because, like, I went blind for the day, and they had to make sure it wasn't permanent. And while he was doing the surgery, because of my condition, he was just like, "Your lenses are not doing you any purpose." I took it out while I was in there. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And at this point, I call him a fairy godfather. He's one of my ophthalmologist. Of course, after surgery and everything healed, he was like, "Okay, we need to make you another contact lens," which again was something when I was in the public health system, they were just like, your eyes are not made for contact lenses. And then I went into the private health system and I found this amazing man who's like, his speciality is difficult cases like me. He actually says, you're one of my 5 difficult cases. And he's been seeing me since I was 15. And, but my contact lenses are custom made. Like he actually had to measure my eyeball and make it so that it could sit on it, which cost an arm and a leg. But after the surgery, he kind of like, okay, I guess you need a new contact lens. And then he puts one on. He's like, okay, we'll start from where you were. And he puts it on. And literally, I don't know, something happened to my face. And he's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? I was like, that's too big. I can see it, because I could only ever see till the second screen. And he's like, you could see the excitement in his eyes. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, and he moves to the next one. And I was like, I can see that one too. So literally, he then just went to the last screen and he worked backwards, which is the most hilarious thing. And so with these contact lenses, I can actually see. Like I went from 95% blind to being 95% being able to see. But without the contact lenses, I see nothing because I no longer have natural lenses in my eyes. They did surgery on the other eye. But I very much still identify as, legally blind, because the minute I don't have glasses on or any kind of like assistive, what do you call these things, contact lenses or glasses, I don't see anything. And I basically revert back to all the strategies I used. So even in my house when I'm lazy or I have a headache, I'll just like, okay, no, I know where everything is. I don't need my glasses to see. But what was interesting about that was I was extricated from the blind community after my surgery. It's like, oh, we don't want you anymore. But guys, up until like 5 years ago, I understood. But apparently that was all erased the minute I got my surgery. So yeah, it's I know I'm talking about my personal story, but that's kind of
yeah, but it's interesting.
I think it's just really, we're nowhere near as organized as you guys are, and I know you have your own issues with how things are run in the UK, but I'm like, oh, we're not even like we're nowhere near any of that in terms of just infrastructure support, financing. It's just like it's it's very like stereotype of like poor Africa when it comes to people with disabilities, unfortunately.
Will you like to tell us a bit about the experience of the lockdown in South Africa?
Lockdown, the thing that's ruined all of us. I mean, I must say, I mean, because of my health condition, I did not have a problem when because I fall into the high risk category because of my heart condition. So, when the president announced, you have to stay at home, I was like, okay, if it means I'm not dying, I'll do it. But South Africa did do, and I think there are many countries in Africa did, which is why, there's a whole kind of BBC Africa insert around, could other leaders from the world actually learn from African leaders, because our numbers have still been low compared to, more developed economies. But we started with a very hard lockdown from the beginning. Like everything was shut except supermarkets, hospitals, literally the essential stuff. And that ended up lasting, I think, 2 to 3 months. Okay. Which unfortunately, because our economy isn't as developed, has meant, I think from a health perspective, and that was something I think anybody in a position of leadership, I would not want to be a leader at this point in time, is kind of toggling between, do we save people's lives, because people are what make the economy. An economy can always be rebuilt, but if there's no people, then
You've got a
the
desert.
economy, yes, pretty much. And I think that's basically the approach the president of South Africa has done. And not everyone has agreed with that decision. Personally, I think it was the right decision to make. And so we had phases. So the hard lockdown was level 5. That did last, I think, about 3 months. And then we went into level 4, which allowed some other kind of sectors to start reopening. Level 3, I would say probably about 90% of the economy opened. Level 2, 95, and then level 1, it's like, okay, back to normal in inverted commas. We've had mandatory mask wearing from day 1, which has been great. Unfortunately, the flip side is now that we're in lockdown level 1, people are like, woo, no masks need to be worn anymore. And you're just like, oh gosh. So our numbers are spiking, and there's rumors that we're going to go back into one of the harder levels. I think everybody's hoping it's not 5, because if it is 4 or 5, our economy is going to crash, like completely flat crash. Yeah, so it's, I think it's just been, the other thing they did do, which again, I think is up for debate, was they banned the sale of alcohol. I think it only resumed in level 3, and cigarettes. And, the claim was it was based on, for the cigarettes anyway, it was based on evidence that obviously because it's a respiratory illness, like people who smoke are at risk. But then of course there was studies coming out of the UK saying, no, that's not the case, and the US. So the tobacco industry was really, really pissed off. They actually took the government to court, and I think they eventually won, which is why they brought it back. The alcohol is because South Africans are not known for being responsible for drinking. So they banned it because they were just like, we do not want our hospital beds to be filled up with alcohol-related incidences. And truth told, the minute they opened up that sale of alcohol, like apparently more than 50% of hospital beds were being taken up due to alcohol-related incidences.
Which isn't the greatest sales pitch in terms of you were wrong to if you're trying to persuade the government they were wrong, then that's
Yeah, no, exactly. So for me, it was more just but all it did was it pushed everything underground. And basically, if I mean, on the one hand, I get it for smokers. If you've been smoking for 20 years and suddenly it's I can't buy cigarettes anymore, I think I would also have a meltdown. But what it did also mean is it's people who had access to it would literally, the price of cigarettes went up probably 10 times. Because you would walk in the streets and you'd still see people smoking. I'm like, but cigarettes are banned, but you could still buy cigarettes. So, I mean, all they did was push it underground. People were forking out a lot more money than they should have, because now people are exploiting the situation. So it was just that was a big mess. And the tobacco and alcohol industry in South Africa are the 2 of the strongest ones as well, just in terms of employment. And so yeah, there was a huge debate around that. I mean, I don't smoke. I'm not a heavy drinker, a social drinker. So I was just like, yeah, okay. I mean, it was an inconvenience when you're like, oh, I feel like a glass of wine. Oh wait, I can't go get one. Okay, fine. But other than that, I wasn't too fazed by it. But yes, especially the alcohol industry, they employ a lot of people. So, but yeah, I mean, now that kind of the economy is opened, we have maybe saved lives, but the economy is crashing very fast. So people are getting retrenched, people are losing jobs. So you do kind of you know, I don't know what's going on in the president's heads, but you're kind of like, okay, could I have done anything differently? But yeah, so now the economy has gone really bad.
I mean, could you go into more detail about kind of the highest levels of lockdown? Because I think one of the things here is that as a person in Manchester, I'm currently in lockdown, but it was very different in terms of like what that actually means. So,
Right.
am I?
So in Manchester, what's your hard lockdown look like?
Well, basically, it means that people people should be working from home. It means honestly, you can still like go out and have walks, and like I think you can still like more than one person can actually go and do shopping at the same time. That one's slightly a rough thing. But honestly, it basically means that people should stay more than 6 feet away from each other and wear masks around the place.
No
like
household mixing.
Yeah, no household mixing is one of the serious ones. Certain amount of shops have been closed. There's like gambling shops and a whole bunch of things, and a whole bunch of like non-essential. There's an entire thing around like where the definition. Basically, you can only sell drinks and sit inside if you also serve food. And that's become a massive like cottage industry of like, if I sell a sandwich with salad, does that count as enough food that I can continue like so yeah, so there's a whole bunch of things, but you know
yeah. I'm trying to remember. So definitely it was working from home. You were only allowed to leave your home to go to the supermarket. Was there a curfew at that stage? There was a curfew. So shops were closing earlier to allow people to be able to go home before the curfew. There was like no exercising, no walking of dogs. You were literally just stuck in your home, and you were only allowed to leave to buy food. And basically all the other shops were closed there. So the only shops that were open were shops that sold food. And even then, I'm not sure how they determined it, but they only allowed a certain amount of people in the store at a time. And then you basically had to wait in line outside. And then they had like they created little spaces which was 2 meters apart.
Yeah, we have that too. Honestly, queuing up has become like one of the street furniture things, just wandering around, just loads of people lining up outside any shop that's open anyway. Sorry.
No, so it was exactly the same thing. And of course the masks, again, they will turn you away. I mean, still now you will get turned away if you don't have a mask. Yeah, so it was, and it was only essential, like they classified essential services. Interestingly enough, animal shelters and vets were part of that in terms of essential service. So if you were on the road and you were not an essential service, you needed to have a permit explaining why you were on the road. And even if you were still driving in like your same city, you needed a permit issued by like the police commander station saying this person has a valid reason to be in their car on the road. So yeah, so it's probably similar to that, minus the fact that like restaurants weren't open, alcohol wasn't sold, cigarettes were not sold, curfew, yeah. And of course no mixing of households. That actually only came back in level 2.
So because we're coming towards the end, is there anything anybody wants to say in closing?
Oh, it's been great chatting to you guys. It's always
Any
nice.
Last questions, Pete?
Yep.
What are your kind of biggest dreams for the South African disabled community of the next, let's go with 10 years?
Oh geez. He leaves the hardest one for last.
Naturally. This has all been a warm up.
Oh,
This is the only
gosh.
this is the one question that will actually be put out.
I would like them to be part of society in every possible way, and not be seen as I would like us to get to a place where if you do see someone with a disability down the street, that not everybody stares at you, because that's still a thing. And I mean, for me, one of my first trips to the UK, and just realizing people just kind of carry on, I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool that you can just carry on, you know. I think it's okay if a kid wants to ask you stuff, because there was also that I did when I had my cane. It was like, no, don't ask. And I was like, no, she has questions. I'm happy to answer them. And it's just like this kind of narrative of fear of, oh, we mustn't offend them, or, you know, it's just like we're people, treat us like people. We also want to be part of society. We also have goals and dreams like everybody else, and would like to realize them to the best of our ability. And if as a society, in terms of like government structures, but also as people, can actually just help people or support people with disabilities to do that, for me, that really would be great. And also that, you know, people with disabilities shouldn't feel like they should hide. I don't think I was an anomaly. There are lots of them who hide for exactly these reasons that we've been chatting about. So that would be my dream, is that actually people with disabilities, irrespective of your disability, is that you're part of the society through and through.
Okay, and on that note, I think we should say goodbye.
Thank you. It's just great chatting with you both. So
See
goodbye.
you again. Keep in touch.
Right.
Yes,
See
we
you,
will.
Samantha. See you, everyone.